Long time no talk. But today I wanted to come with you with an interview that I actually did for a trainee journalist for Vice. So, we talk about my background and the negative consequences that you can potentially run into with this whole clean eating trend that we see all too often these days. So, here it is with me and Krissa. We're just talking about my journey and then how it led into the extreme of disordered eating and an unhealthy relationship with food and my body. And so, we're just trying to get the message out there on how to just be cautious when you take up any of these healthful lifestyles, right? So I hope that you enjoy it. And yeah, tell me what you think in the comments below. Okay, and share with anyone that you think that might need to hear this message or might benefit from it. Okay, so here we go into the interview.
Okay, so I have some questions here, like written down. Were you doing like what is this called? Like not like fitness modeling. What was it?
Fitness modeling, fitness competitions, they go hand in hand, because you're prepping for both the photo shoot, prepping for the competitions, which just means you're dieting down, you're cutting carbs, cutting fat, cutting salt, cutting oil, dehydrating yourself, taking diuretics, all of that stuff just to get a photo that everyone sees. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I want to be like that. But that's not even what that person really looks like in real life. So that's why I do what I do, is because I'm like, this is dysfunctional and it's creating a lot of problems.
Because you've actually been there. It was you. So you can actually have a proper opinion on what it is like.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people don't want to talk about it, even though they're struggling, because they've created a brand, they have money behind it, they don't want to admit that they were wrong, all kinds of reasons. So then people go on thinking that they're really healthy and happy, but on the other side of the photo, they're like struggling and suffering.
Yeah. So could you tell me a bit about what you think of clean eating as a diet?
Okay, yeah. So like I was saying just before, people go into clean eating just with good intentions. They're innocent. They just want to get healthy, or maybe they just want to get a little more tone. They want to get fit because they see the Fitspo Instagram or magazine covers or whatever. And so they're like, okay, well, I should just clean up my diet because that's what everyone else is doing, so I should do it too. And so, or maybe they're pressured into it by their peers or something, and they feel bad about their dietary choices because some people, they almost act superior to one another because of their diet choices. So there's like this hierarchy with different diets, like mine's right and yours is wrong, paleo, vegan, all these dietary wars. So that's what it can turn into. So, I mean, at first it's fine if you're approaching it with a balanced mindset. So you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to clean up my diet here and there. I'm not going to say no to all these foods or food groups. I'm not going to completely cut whole food groups or specific foods. And you're just balanced, and you work out when you feel like it. And then you don't when you really want to rest or your body's asking just to chill. And so that's completely fine and normal. But the problem is when some people go to the extreme and then they start having more off-limit foods than okay foods that they're not allowed to eat, more bad foods than good foods. And so this just keeps going and going because now nothing's ever good enough. And there's typically a driving factor to want to lose weight. So that can become very dysfunctional, because if that's your driving force, then you develop this unhealthy relationship with food. You become fearful around food because you don't want to gain weight, because you fear nobody will love you, or you won't be attractive, or you won't get the guy that you're trying to impress or whatever. So it becomes really dysfunctional, and then you become fearful around food. And then to top it off, you're not just fearful around food, but because you're cutting so many foods and you're becoming so clean that now you run into digestive problems, you run into hormonal problems, you're cutting whole macronutrients, which are necessary for our body. Every cell in our body requires glucose or sugar. So when people are on low carb diets, then they run into problems. They start losing their hair, they lose their period, they can't sleep, and like all sorts of problems start to arise. So this is where clean eating can become a real issue and a real problem.
Sorry, when did you start like this diet?
I started So it went on for like almost a decade. It was like 8 years.
Decade.
Yeah.
Oh
And it
my
just went through all different sorts of different manipulations or diet tweaks because one wasn't working. So I'm like, okay, this must be the golden ticket to health and fitness. So then I kept switching and yo-yoing and going back and forth. But initially I just started out with the fitness dieting. And back when that was a thing, it was the low fat, low carb, high protein.
A lot of like, high protein. Yeah.
Yeah. So you eat, they justify like, well, I'm eating a lot because I'm eating 5 to 6 times a day, every 2 to 3 hours. But really, when you look at the diet, it's super restrictive because you're not allowed to have salt.
I saw your video.
Yeah.
It's just like broccoli, chicken, and yeah.
Broccoli, chicken, and then like tilapia and asparagus, and like a fourth of a cup of oats, and that's it. So that's really restrictive. And so that's what it started out with. And then after like my last fitness competition, I was like, okay, I'm done with this because I was suffering so bad. And then I ran into binging and purging. So then I developed bulimia. And then I was like on this quest to heal my digestive problems and my hormonal problems. And so that's when, I switched to another clean eating diet, which was veganism. And then I switched to paleo, and then I switched to GAPS. So there's all kinds of variations, and they all, the bottom line is they're restrictive in some shape or form. And that always is like the inevitable result of that is obsession with food, binging, and then all the other problems.
I think like many like dietitians or like bloggers, the bloggers are like a different story, but they fail to portray like the real image. For example, I didn't even know that you could develop bulimia after like a specific diet, or like those like disorders could be connected and like.
Yeah, they don't talk about it. They don't warn you. Like pharmaceutical drugs, they warn you of all the side effects potentially. But with diets or fitness competitions and the prep, nobody warns you. Everyone talks about the highlights and the body that you're going to get or how healthy you're going to get, but they don't warn you of all the other problems. So that's it. Yeah, it's a problem.
It is, definitely. You started at like 12 or like.
Yeah, I started
14.
like around 14. Yeah.
So, you're so young. Yeah.
And that's a problem I see is, and a lot of the people that I work with or that come to me, they're like 10 years old, they're very young. But then I have all people all across the range that are 60 years old and still struggling.
What kind of people like come to you? Do they look for advice on like how to eat healthy or like have like a proper diet?
That's who I used to work with in the fitness industry, but now I help you recover after that. After you've tried everything and you're suffering and struggling and you want to recover now and find something that's really sustainable for you and balanced for you, that's what I try to help with.
You're the ideal person for that. Do many people come to you?
Yeah. So, I have like a whole coaching course that's 7 weeks long. It's like self-study, but I also do Q&As in there. But I was doing private coaching, but I just have too many right now. I can't take on anymore. You can't give enough energy. And then, I have people on Instagram and YouTube, but typically my focus is in the course.
Yeah, that makes sense. And can you tell me a bit like in specific how did this type of eating like affect you like physically and mentally, like some bullet points of what the actual effects are?
Oh yeah. So first it started out with I was starting to feel dizzy and then it turned into my hair was falling out in clumps. Then it was I lost my period. I had no sex drive, and it ruined my relationship at that time because you can only think about food. You're obsessed with food thoughts. You feel uncontrollable around food.
You can never like imagine how it is if you're not in that state.
Yes, exactly. And that's the problem because then people see you binging and they're like, what's wrong with you? Or you think, what's wrong with me? Because nobody else is doing it that's not coming from a restrictive background. And nobody can understand the feeling, the sensation of the extreme hunger that happens unless you're in it. So like if you try to understand or try to explain to someone like, I can eat and never feel full. Like I could eat 10,000 calories easily in one sitting. Like people would think you're nuts because they don't understand it and they've never felt it. So it's hard for people to recover when, everyone's like, what the hell are you doing eating all that food?
This is true. Like, did your friends know that it was a bit like too much? Had they realized, or was it like normal?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to reach out because I had a whole community back then, and I tried to tell everyone, and everyone's like, well, you must be doing something wrong. That's a lot what you hear. And it's like,
Mm.
typically people who go through this, their personalities are extreme perfectionistic, like they do everything to the T. So there's like, people, we're not doing it wrong. It's just not right for our bodies to do that. And so that's the inevitable result is,
Mm-hmm.
the extreme hunger and the binging from any restriction.
Any other like effects? Was there anything else? Like because
Yeah.
there's something like wrong with like bones when
Oh,
you do like a very like
yeah.
osteoporosis, I think
Yeah.
is the name. Yeah.
Yeah. You start to get low bone density, and,
Mm.
a lot of people feel like
Mm.
osteoporosis type feelings. Also, people who are restrictive and they start to face these problems then have a propensity for heart disease. It's
Mhm.
really hard on the heart. So that's why people in recovery then have a really hard time with their heart, because now it's like this influx of water and nutrients, and your heart actually shrinks because, like your lowered metabolism, everything starts to shrink and slow down and shut down because,
Mm.
it's weak, and
Yeah.
as a survival mechanism or
Mm.
conservation technique. So heart problems, your digestive system. Oh my
I
gosh,
can
people become
imagine.
really bloated, like they feel like they're 9 months pregnant after anything they eat. Constipation, leg cramps, insomnia. You wake up and you feel like your whole nervous system is shaking and tingling because it's really bad for your nervous system.
Mm.
Brain fog, just no energy. You lose your personality. You're like, you don't remember what it's like to have fun anymore because you lose yourself.
Mm.
And then also the body dysmorphia, you lose your identity. You don't even know like what you want anymore out of life. You just lose a sense of self.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So there is a long list of things. And if you look into the Minnesota starvation experiment, it was an experiment. Have you heard of it?
No, I'm gonna note it down though. What was about, like the experiment?
Yeah. So just briefly, I write a lot about it, like in my book.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people refer to it because it was a study done back in the war where they wanted to understand the effects of starvation. And so it shows like a lot of people, even just coming from a restrictive diet of like 1,500 calories, the men were just on 1,500 calories. That's like a typical diet. And they start to experience all of the starvation type symptoms, just like someone with anorexia would.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's a whole long list, but that's the main problems that people start to see. Low metabolism.
You can imagine. And you seem like you were working out a lot. How did you have the energy to work out?
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
like, so it's like this weird thing because you feel like exhausted and fatigued all the time, but yet you can't sleep and you still push yourself to work out.
Mm.
I talk about this too a lot. Not in my book because I learned about
I
this
believe
after.
I heard in one of your videos, that's why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our body goes into this survival response,
Mm-hmm.
right, to starvation or restriction. So it thinks, if you look back to the migration theory, the body
Mm-hmm.
thinks that it's trying to migrate. When the environment is scarce and there's not an abundance of food, the body's like, okay, we need to turn down our, hunger and satiety signals because those cost too much energy, and we need to migrate to a new environment. So to be able to do that, you can't be tired and sleepy. So the body triggers in the brain anxiety. We can't sleep. We have to have a false sense of energy to be able to get to an environment to survive. So that's why a lot of people have this false sense of energy to keep going and going. But then once they find food, or they decide to recover and they eat a lot of food, or they do their cheat meal and they binge or something, then they feel exhausted and tired. And then they're like, oh, see, it's the bad foods. They're bad for me because
Yeah.
we feel tired. But really, it's just that the body's like, okay, now we have food. Now we can rest and refeed.
Like replaces, like fills out the gap of like sleep and like.
Yeah,
I can just
exactly.
imagine. And like, were you yourself like influenced by Instagram, for example, or YouTube or like social media?
Yeah, so it was a mixture of, because back then, you know, I had this boyfriend that was into
Mm-hmm.
bodybuilding at
Mm-hmm.
16 as an effort to impress a guy. You know, I was like, oh, I'm going to get into that. And
Yeah.
at first it was fun. I liked working out. I was like innocent here and there. But
Mm-hmm.
then it turned into something big because nothing ever became good enough to try to impress that person. But then I lost all interest in that because you lose yourself kind of. And then it was like, just go with it and you keep going further and further. And yeah, I was influenced by Instagram because back when I was doing it, it was like the beginning, like Fitspo wasn't even a thing, or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so
Like
like
when was it? Was it like 2000?
2012 or 2000,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, Instagram was there. It had just been open to droids. It was only iPhones for a while, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's when it all became a thing. Like people like Paige Hathaway, they were just like, you know, a normal person. And then all of a sudden it exploded, and Fitspo and Fitspiration and
Mm-hmm.
IFBB, all of that became huge. And so that, yeah, that completely influences you, because then you have this thing called comparisonitis, and you're like comparing yourself to these photos. And yeah, you see it all the time. It's,
And it still happens. Like I think now more than ever.
oh yeah, because it's huge now. It's everywhere.
Yes. I mean, even when I go out, not even Instagram, I always hear people talking about like how healthy they ate today or
Yeah.
how much they worked out or how it's like all over the place.
And how they did
Um,
it. So then they feel guilty
mm,
and shameful. And yeah, there's a lot of
true.
guilt and shame around it if you're not doing it.
And were there like for the symptoms of like your diet, the consequences, were they like the same throughout or were there like more and more like new ones coming in?
Yeah, it slowly and steadily progressed and got worse. You know, because
Mm-hmm.
at first it just started out as that dizziness. Then it went into the hair loss, and then it went into loss of period. Then it went into, you know, and all of the things gradually just added. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it just got worse and worse to where at one point in my journey, for like a whole year straight, I literally was scared to go to bed because I thought like it, for some reason at night, the sensations got stronger and I felt like I was literally dying. Like my body was like shutting down. So,
Oh.
and then of course it got worse too because I had to use enemas every single day to even have a bowel movement.
And many people do it actually. Like I
Yeah.
had a friend of mine who went to like islands together in the summer and she brought some like with her, just like in case, because she doesn't want to have like a bloated belly like on the beach.
See, and yeah, it, because it's promoted as being helpful to clean out your
Mm,
GI and stuff, but then it, just like with everything else, you can abuse it and
mm.
until you're dependent on it.
This is true. And can you tell me a bit about your like recovery? When did you like know that it was like enough? Like I need to get better.
Yeah, well, it's a long story of like how it happened because I didn't really want to ever, because I was still like
Mhm.
in that mindset that what I was
Mhm.
doing was so healthy. It just got to the point where my biology took over and I had just a bite of normal food like pasta or something, and it just triggered that in my brain to
Oh.
you know, because it was like, oh my gosh, we have food, we need to make up for the energy deficit that you've been in for
Mhm.
years. So I couldn't control myself, and I thought that there was something wrong with me and that I was broken and that my body was failing me and I was a failure, you know. From there you keep going, and I talk about it too, like how I went on like a several month long binge, you know,
Mhm.
and I just couldn't control myself. And through that period, I was like, I started to look into it and research online, like what's going on, why can't I stop eating, kind of stuff like that. And I found some recovery sites because I was facing edema, and I was like, oh my gosh, my heart, I'm having heart failure and kidney failure. But it
Yeah,
was,
like it's always like when you like search online your symptoms, it's like you have cancer.
yeah, it's either like the worst case scenario or like,
Or
oh
like the yeah.
yeah. So that's how. And so luckily the internet isn't all bad. It helped me. You know, I
Mm.
found some good sources and I was like, oh my gosh. And then I got into eating disorder recovery blogs and
Mhm.
certain books, and I was like, oh my gosh, did I have an eating disorder? Like I never thought I could have had an eating disorder, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then just from there, it was a slow progression of like a couple of years of going back and forth, because your brainwash, like your mindsets and beliefs have become so ingrained of
Yeah.
being healthy and fit that
Because
it's
it's like,
hard.
then it was your life back then. It was the normal thing to do for you. So it's so hard for someone to like pull you out of it.
Yeah,
I mean, you can imagine
exactly.
how hard it is.
Yeah, you're like, well, I need to do this because I've believed for so long and everyone's
Mm.
told me like this is the way. So you're like fighting it, but then your body's like, no, give me food. And so
Yeah.
like totally lost touch with your body. So you're not even wanting to trust it or listen to it.
Mm.
It was just a slow progression of going back and forth between restricting and recovery and restricted and recovery until I finally, like you said, I was, fuck it, I'm done.
Yeah.
And then I gave in. And then, yeah, that was another couple of year fiasco.
Yeah.
Literally,
Was it like with a doctor dietitian, or was it like a self-recovery?
it was a self-recovery because, and I don't advise everyone to do this, but in my personal
Mhm.
situation, it was self with some people online that I found guidance through, like
Mhm.
kind of what I do now. That's why I do it, because that helped me
Yeah.
so much. But when I went to the doctors initially after my competitions and I was facing the bloating and the
Yeah.
hormone problems, I was telling them like what was going on, and they couldn't find anything wrong on the blood work
Mhm.
and their tests. So they thought that it was all in my head. They literally told me it was all in my head, and they wanted to put me on medication. And I was like, no, fuck that. Like, there's something seriously wrong here.
Yeah.
So that's when I went on my own self journey, and it led me down some really bad paths, like cleansing and juicing and raw veganism, that really made everything worse. But eventually I found my way. So
Yeah, and that's what matters. I mean,
yeah,
of course.
yeah.
And yes, and would like the main piece of advice for people attempting this kind of like lifestyle? What would your piece of advice be for
Ooh,
anyone?
be very cautious, and don't believe everything that you see in the
Mhm.
photos as their perfect life and they're perfectly healthy. Don't believe everything that you see or read. Like, a lot of people can be deceiving. A lot of people in these restrictive lifestyles claim that this is the most healthiest lifestyle, like paleo or veganism, raw veganism, or whatever, or ketogenic. But on the inside, they're lying to themselves and they're suffering, but they don't want to come to terms with like maybe the restrictiveness in their diet is causing some
Mhm.
problems. So you don't even get that part though, because all you see or hear is that like this specific thing they're doing is like perfect and that they need to do it.
Yeah.
So just like be cautious, be an open-minded skeptic, to what if all these claims of clean eating, and just really like don't lose yourself, and always take home what you
Mhm.
hear or read, and then like process it to yourself and see if it resonates with you. And maybe if you try it out, like keep yourself in check so you don't lose yourself, and then you lose control, and then you spiral out and you develop an unhealthy relationship with
It's all
food.
like a circle. It's like everything
Yeah.
is connected. Yeah.
So just, keep yourself in check, because it can happen really easily and like under your nose, and people don't
Mhm.
realize it.
Yeah, that's why like people like you need to like come in like as you are and like tell people, because like I think from dietitians and nutritionists and doctors, like actual doctors,
Mhm.
they don't like inform people a lot. That's what I told you, because it's, I don't know. Then you get like more information from like you, like on YouTube or like Instagram, or like if people like come and talk to you, then they ever would be like from a doctor or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, I know it's just even back from, if you go back through each generation, there's been all sorts of fads. I mean, Atkins is now ketogenic, just in a new name, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
They touted low fat at one point and like low cholesterol, but now it's like high cholesterol paleo. And so
Yeah.
it's just like, if you really look at it from the start of like the Industrial Revolution and diet culture, when it started, it's like you can see that trends come in and out, and wherever you look you can find something to justify what you want to see. So if you're like, well, I want this low carb diet to be my answer, you're going to find it on the internet. You just have to find a balance that works for yourself and just stick with that, and then tune out
Yeah.
bullshit.
Definitely. I completely agree.
Yeah.
Those were my questions. Like you covered everything. Thank you so much. You've been like amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for like telling me everything, informing me like better, because like, yeah, as I told you, you can never find like as exact like information like on the internet, like from someone else. Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing your work. And
I'm gonna email you like when I finish the story, I'm gonna send it to you.
okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.